Hi, everybody, and welcome to another wonderful honorable mention of the best games, period. The show where we get together on the weekly to talk about a game that may or may not be one of the best games of all time. And sometimes, schedules being what they are, Naomi and I don't necessarily have time to get together and do our usual rambunctious back and forth tete-a-tete conversations that you have come to know and love. I don't know why I was talking with a weird cadence. Anyway, but this is a show where we usually talk about video games and which ones are good and why they're good and why we like them and why they might be one of the best games of all time. Honorable mentions are kind of a little different because it's usually just one of us talking, and the game might not actually be one of the best of all time. And this week's game is definitely one that you could make a very strong case for being one of the best games of all time. At one point, it was the most widely played game in the world before Fortnite came and took that over. But yeah, I'm obviously talking about League of Legends, a MOBA, a strategic multiplayer online battle arena, a SMOBA, if you will. But before we can really talk about League of Legends, we really have to get into the history of the MOBA, because it's actually pretty strange how this entire genre came to be, and it's proven to be a highly profitable and highly popular genre over the last several years. And so I believe in order to do that, we have to go back in time all the way to a little game known as StarCraft, which was an RTS, a real-time strategy game made by Blizzard, back when it was just Blizzard and not Activision Blizzard. And StarCraft had this has a long history of having a vibrant modding community. To this day, you can find all kinds of crazy games that have been modified out of StarCraft 2 or the original StarCraft. And there's just this really... It's kind of crazy, and how many different games people have come up with. Like, honestly, if you have StarCraft 2 and you haven't checked out the mods, you are missing out on a huge part of what makes that game so great. And so you had StarCraft, and this is back in the day, back in the beginnings of the online internet, being a huge deal for video games. A modder by the name of Aeon64 created a mod called Aeon Strife. Now, Aeon Strife was a pretty popular mod back in 1998, but it wasn't becoming its own genre levels of popular. That would come along with Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos, which I believe is the remastered game that Activision Blizzard now is going to be putting out in short order. But Warcraft 3 also had a very vibrant modding community, and it was also an RTS. And someone in the Warcraft 3 community decided that, hey, I'm going to make my own version of Aeon of Strife. I might have just said Aeon Strife. It was Aeon of Strife. And so this modder, by the name of Yule, E-U-L, some of these online names, don't know how to pronounce them, but Yule made a game called Defense of the Ancients, which became shortened to Dota, which is probably one of the most famous mods of all time. It has its own Base Hunter CD, an entire album dedicated to just Dota and how much fun it is. So, it's gotta be good, right? Well, it's actually kind of people still play Defense of the Ancients, by the way, and that would be a very interesting, probably a full episode of this maybe, or maybe another honorable mention down the line. But Dota really kind of encapsulates everything that we imagine the MOBA genre to be today. It's composed of many different heroes and champions with different ability sets and powers, all competing in a online multiplayer game. And I guess the kind of the core idea of Defense of the Ancients is that each player in the map, it looks like an RTS, but when people are playing, you only have control over one unit, as opposed to a normal RTS where you're usually in charge of anywhere from 1 to 200 units at any given time. And so Defense of the Ancients had its heyday, and people played that like crazy. You had like entire tournaments. It's something that really took on a life of its own. And I know, a life of its own. Then yeah, whatever. It's hard to really kind of expound upon that. But then another modder came along named Ginsu, who and kind of further refined on Dota to create Dota All-Stars. And that further put on a bunch of different layers of complexity that have now been kind of baked into the basic MOBA genre as a whole. And then Ginsu formally passed on kind of, I guess, guardianship of Dota All-Stars to a modder named IceFrog. And Ginsu did that because he left development on Dota All-Stars to found Riot Games, and they were developing League of Legends, which is the game I came here to talk about tonight. How about that? How about that long transition into getting to League of Legends? So League of Legends released in 2009, and it's really been, I would describe it as a really, really long and ongoing development process. And I think that it's part of what makes it so interesting is that League of Legends as a whole really it took a little bit to get off the ground because it was a new IP, and a lot of the other modders for Dota went on to create competitors. So you had Valve putting out Dota 2, and I believe that was made with IceFrog at the helm. There was also Heroes of Newerth. Eventually Smite came along with its own interpretation of MOBA as kind of like a first-person thing, which is really interesting. And those are just a few of the biggest ones. But League of Legends kind of got a leg up on the competition by coming out first. And furthermore, it realized that one of the main driving forces of Dota All-Stars popularity was that it was free. You didn't have to buy anything to play Dota. And so League of Legends was also free. And it made its money off of microtransactions, which really, I'm not going to credit League of Legends for inventing microtransactions, but I will give League of Legends credit for really solidifying it as a viable way of making money if you were in the free-to-play space. At the very least, in a way that wasn't overtly predatory. Like, there are definitely social... There are social incentives, and now you can kind of see their main business model has shifted away from really refining the game to putting production value into getting people to continue playing the game. So just recently they announced that they're partnering with Marvel Comics to put out a line of graphic novels, and they're also they generated huge buzz by putting out that music video, which was really artistically interesting, but it also served the purpose of hyping up their new line of skins. And so the microtransactions that they popularized were either purchasing shortcuts to unlock heroes, which you could then play in-game, but you could also unlock those heroes by just playing the game and saving up in-game currency, which it gives you enough of to not feel like you're trapped with the characters you have. So you can either take those shortcuts to getting more characters, or you can use real money to purchase these skins. And they basically just make your champions look cooler when you're playing the game. Or maybe not cooler, but different, or funny, or, insert whatever. And so a lot of their financial motivation has shifted towards these skins and figuring out how to get people to continue playing and keep buying these skins. Because they've made so much money off of this. And we'll get back to this in a little bit. I think it's... At first, it was probably something that was relatively good, especially for a free-to-play game to have this way of generating money. But I think in the long run, it has kind of hamstrung League of Legends creatively. I think there are a lot of interesting things that they could do with League of Legends that they just don't. Because there's not the financial incentive isn't there for them to really continue iterating on this idea when it's making them this much money. So, I guess I need to... I'm getting kind of lost on my train of thought, so I need to take a step back and kind of recenter where I'm coming from. So, League of Legends came out in 2009, and fun fact, I still remember seeing boxed copies of this in stores. You could actually go out to like a Walmart or a Target and find a boxed copy for a free-to-play PC game in a brick-and-mortar store, which is kind of crazy to think about in 2018. But, 9 years ago was a really different time in terms of technology and where games were, and the whole space was different. One of the interesting things about the game at first was the low price of entry. So it was really cheap. People could just kind of shift over from Dota and start playing League of Legends. And a lot of people did, because it was a prettier, more refined experience that was still shaky at first, but it's made by one of the people who originally made Dota, so it had some solid foundations. And originally, the core concept of League of Legends was that when you signed up to play, you were taking on the role of a summoner. And summoners were these fictional characters in the land of Runeterra who had bound these powerful entities and characters to their will to summon them to this magical arena called Summoner's Rift to do battle and kind of settle disputes between different powers. And it was a way of kind of binding these world-shattering entities or preventing all-out war between nations that could rip apart the entire continent. And that's actually, as far as ideas go for a game like this, that's actually pretty good, I would argue. And the problem was that a lot of the backstories for their characters weren't very good. A lot of them just talked about how this weird creature was just kind of found buried in the sand, and now it's wreaking havoc, and it got bound to the League of Legends. There wasn't a whole lot of thought put into the story going on behind these characters. It was more about their mechanics and their movesets and their look, like how they looked in the game and how they could be monetized with skins and all that kind of jazz. And over time, what ended up happening is that Riot Games decided that they needed to really push their lore, and they tried to bake it into real-world gameplay a little bit. So, for example, I remember that there was an event. I don't remember exactly when this was. It was a few years ago. But they had an event where players could, by playing different champions, earn points for an overall war score. And it was to literally settle a fictional war between these two nations in the lore of the game. And that was actually really, really neat, I thought. And then the outcome of that war the outcome of the war actually determined which in-game item would be added to League of Legends, and that's actually a really big deal. And I'll get to kind of the core mechanics of League of Legends in a little bit. But essentially what where I'm going with this is they had all these really cool ideas centered around the central idea of summoners and their players being the summoners. The name of the main map is called Summoner's Rift. There were a bunch of audio cues, and there are still audio cues in this game that refer to summoners. And then I think about a couple years ago, it might have been 3 years ago, Riot just decided, F it, we're scrapping all of our lore. Pretty much everything that they had created, backstories, the good and the bad, were all kind of jettisoned out the back door, and they even destroyed the very concept of summoners. And so, ever since then, they have been slowly building back up the backstory of League of Legends, which is why I find it very interesting that they're now coming out with this Marvel graphic novel series about their different characters, especially when 2 years ago, they decided their lore was so bad that or 2 or 3 years ago, they decided their lore was so bad that they had to just scrap most of it. And, I think that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I feel like there probably were ways they could have just added to League of Legends, added more flesh to those backstories and given those different characters interesting things, but instead they just scrapped it all. So a little disappointing. But the basic mechanics of League of Legends, it's a 5 versus 5 game. So 5 players on one side, 5 players on the other side, and people will essentially battle each other. Each player picks a different champion. You can't have double of the same champion in one game. And there are 3 different lanes on the map, and you spread out across those lanes as you see fit as a team. Like what's the most strategic kind of placement of the different characters. And in between those lanes is a forest full of different monsters and pathways through it. And usually there's one character that, well, the meta, the general structure of the game that has emerged has been there's one character in the upper lane, there's one character in the mid lane, and then there are 2 characters in the bottom lane. And in the bottom lane, that's usually where you keep your squishiest, your most vulnerable character, and there is another hero down there to kind of keep them alive. That's kind of the dynamic that's going on. And then there will also be another character that runs around in the area between the lanes, killing the monsters in the jungle. And as you kill monsters, as you kill enemy champions, as you kill minions, which periodically spawn from each team's base and walk down the lanes. Player characters get experience, they get gold that they can spend on items, and it all kind of falls into a very similar rhythm, which is one of the reasons I like League of Legends so much and why I'm talking about it at length, finally. There is a comforting rhythm that once you learn it, you know your role, you know what you're supposed to do, and it's just a matter of doing that thing really well. And there's not necessarily the same amount of chaos that you see in, like, say, an FPS game, and there's not the same need for micromanagement as in, say, a full RTS. So it kind of falls into this sweet spot where you feel like you can always improve, and the games last anywhere from 15 minutes to generally about 30 minutes is when they end. But sometimes you can get into a game that lasts almost an hour. And so it generally falls into, like, the kind of game where you go in expecting to play one match and you end up playing 2 or 3. It kind of has this addictive quality to it. It's seductive. Players earn gold and experience, and you level up. So each game, all the characters start out at level 1, and over the course of the game, they level up to the level cap of 18. And as you're leveling, you are getting this gold as well, and so every time you go back to your base, you have the opportunity to spend that money on various items, and usually the strategy is to buy items that will counter whatever the enemy team, the team you're facing, whatever they lack and your character excels at. So if you're a character that does magic damage, you want to, and your opposing team is building items that stop magic damage, then hey, you're going to want to build items that have some magic penetration, so you can penetrate their defenses and kill them easier. Or you might, if you're dying a lot, you might want to build some armor or some magic resist or some health. You know, you have a bunch of different options at your disposal, and it's a game of acting and reacting. So if the enemy has the upper hand, then you're kind of reacting to whatever the enemy does. And if you have the upper hand, then the enemy is reacting to whatever you're doing. And so so part of what's satisfying is learning the individual champions that you like and kind of figuring out how you play them, and then how you build them, and then how to be a good player in that role. So, for example, what a jungler does, the person who runs between the different lanes and kills the monsters in the jungle, is very different from what a support does, aka keeping the attack damage carry in the bottom lane, the squishy, vulnerable character, keeping them safe and keeping them alive. So learning how to excel in that role while playing your champion well, and paying attention to the entire scope of the game, kind of reading the playing field and figuring out what the best thing to do in a given situation is. It sounds really simple. Like there are just, be good at your champion, be good at your role, and be good, at figuring out the best thing for you to do given the state of the game at any given moment. Those 3 things sound simple, are actually much harder in practice, and it's why you can build an entire e-sport around this one game. And it's also why it became one of the most popular games of all time. This League of Legends, again, was one of the most popular games in the world, one of the most played games at any given time. And its popularity has certainly diminished in recent years, probably because it's core gameplay has largely remained unchanged, and that's one of its strengths because that allows for the esport to be built up around it, having that kind of consistent set of rules. But also it's a weakness, I would argue, because the game doesn't branch out, really. Like, yes, occasionally there will be different game modes that they release, but they're seasonal. And they're kind of there for a little bit, and then they're gone. And at one point, they released a game mode called Dominion, which was actually a really interesting idea, and it took place on this circular map, completely different from the main Summoner's Rift map. And they also introduced a game mode called ARAM, All Random, All Mid, in which there is only one lane, and there was no jungle. And those are interesting. Those were interesting permutations on the core concept, but I've always wanted to see them do other things. Like, they periodically release new champions, so the roster is always getting larger and larger. And they almost always have really interesting cinematics to introduce these characters, or interesting cinematics to introduce different character skins. And one of the things I think would be really neat is if they released like mini campaigns for these characters, that operate almost like a tutorial. Go through and kind of, you get to experience a little section of their story, a little glint of that lore that they have been kind of slowly improving upon, and also get to learn that new champion. What can they do? What's interesting about them? What makes them shine? And you could put together some really interesting scenarios set in this world that they have created, and maybe let us experience things outside of this one 3-lane area, or the occasional 3-lane area that has a slightly different rule set, or Dominion's never coming back, so we can't ever experience the circular map again, but maybe something that's different than the 1-lane map, which is the only other game mode that is consistently available. And I hate it. I don't like it. You get assigned a random champion, and then you have to fight in 1 lane for the entire game, and it's usually over in like 10 to 15 minutes. But I don't find it fun. I know a lot of people do find it fun. It's just not my thing. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's not a huge deal. The core game itself is incredibly solid, and it's why I've sunk thousands of games into League of Legends. I have played this game like crazy, and I will continue to play this game like crazy. I think that there is just a lot of missed potential in it that has been missed largely due to its pursuit of profit, and also to, largely due to its pursuit of profit. Like, the Riot Games wants to make money off of the skins, and so it prioritizes the skins rather than really any kind of innovation to the gameplay, outside of adding new champions to the game, which again has it's not as profitable to them because it takes longer to make a full champion that works well, and you can make a skin in a much shorter amount of time, especially with the resources that they have. Just keeping it real, keeping it 100 for you. They can make skins faster than they can make champions, and they have more financial incentive to make skins. So, on that note, I think that the getting lost in the allure and profitability of microtransactions has really held League of Legends back as a company, and that might be something that's not entirely Riot Games' fault, because again, a couple years ago they were bought by a company called Tencent, which is a large Chinese company, and I imagine that a large company buys another company to make more money. And so it's not surprising that, the priority is even maybe more heavily than before putting out these skins to make money. And again, with the KDA music video, you have a huge example of how far Riot Games will go to sell these skins. And that is a very impressive music video. I know people who love that music video. It's very good. I love it. It actually got me to buy one of the skins. So case in point, it works. As a game, I think that it could be so much more. Especially, it's been out for 9 years. 9 years with the same map and the same core gameplay. And sure, they have released visual updates to the game that change how the main map looks. It's much better looking than it was 9 years ago. But even so, the main core gameplay of the game has not shifted at all. And I don't think that they have really added anything that plays that much differently or is that much more interesting. And I think that causes some of the interest in League of Legends to wane over time. And so I guess what I'm saying is I wish that they could just make this thing without having to worry about making money, which is easy for me to say as someone who doesn't make much money and is not making games at Riot. And speaking of making games at Riot, we can't really talk about League of Legends without talking about the big elephant in the room, which is the work culture at Riot Games, which is not good. It's not bueno. There was a recent expose published on Kotaku.com that got into the company's long history of really fostering a sexist attitude at the workplace. People talking about, a lot of male-centric talk. We'll leave it at that. And a lot of women feeling alienated in the workplace or being harassed or claims of misconduct not being taken seriously. And it's the same old song and dance that we've seen time after time. And I'm sure Riot Games promised that they would do better in response to that expose, and I'm not sure that anything will be done, but who knows? Maybe we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe not. But it is something to be aware of, that League of Legends for a long time was famous for having one of the most toxic player bases. And to this day, there are friends I have who won't play this game with me because the player base is so toxic. Because when you go into a game and maybe you die, maybe you make a mistake, and your teammates start harassing you and calling you names and using foul language, and it's unpleasant. It's not fun. And the game is heavily team oriented, so if you're playing by yourself, why continue playing a game where you just get flamed at? Especially if you're just starting out and learning. People are really mean. People are not fun to play with. And it's one of the games that, it got voice chat capabilities, but I don't know why anyone would ever use voice chat in League of Legends. Because the people who generally, I've put thousands of games into League of Legends. I almost said thousands of hours, but I don't want to go that far. Hopefully not thousands of hours, but probably thousands of hours. I've put a lot of time into this game, and there's no way I would ever hop into a voice chat with just random people from League of Legends. I just wouldn't do it. Because chances are, people are going to use a racial slur, or they're gonna make some ableist slurs, or they're gonna talk about, just the worst things you can think about. People will say them. And I will say that it is not as bad as when I played PUBG. And PUBG was kind of the big thing. But that's an incredibly low bar. Like, the lowest possible bar, I would argue, is being able to go into a League of Legends game and be fairly sure that there won't be someone spamming the lobby with just racial slurs nonstop for as long as they possibly can. So, if that's the bar for being a good enough online community, then congratulations, League of Legends, you passed it. But, again, I would never talk to anybody, just random people playing League. The very concept of that is ludicrous to me. And so that gives you an idea that it's not a welcoming game for new people, because people have these attitudes, and especially if you reveal that you're a woman while playing League of Legends. I mean, you generally don't want to do that in online games anyway, because people get really gross really fast, and they'll get really mean really fast. And by people, I mean men. Men are the worst in online games sometimes, especially towards women. And so, I guess what I'm getting at here is I'm not surprised that the workplace at Riot is so toxic, when the player base is also so toxic, and relatively little has been done about it. For a long time, there was a really interesting system in place called the Tribunal of Justice. And you could go in and review, like as a player, you could go into the Tribunal of Justice and review reported players and decide whether or not you felt like they were guilty or innocent, which that's actually a really interesting idea, and a really interesting way of passing off responsibility for policing the community to the community. But that being said, from doing that as well, people in League of Legends were awful. And that's not to say everyone who plays League of Legends is awful. Again, I play League of Legends, and I like to think I'm not awful. But the game itself had some core underlying problems, especially when it came to community management. They made a big deal several years ago about hiring someone who specializes in like brain studies to manage the community and like come up with new strategies for management. And I think that made things a little better, noticeably a little better. But I think that there are also a lot of player interactions that might have been forgiven that probably shouldn't have been. If that Kotaku expose is indicative of general Riot Games culture, then there's probably a reason that the Riot community in League of Legends is not that great, and known for being not that great. So, really what kind of keeps this from being, like, even, again, I've played thousands of games of League of Legends. I love this game very much. I think that what keeps it from being a best game period for me is that community management. It is a game that lives and dies on how players can interact in game. And like they've even done number crunches, and games that have someone who's being rude or, you know, using those expletives, your team loses 15% more games. But they don't they haven't been able to find any systems that really effectively deals with these people. And I don't know that they necessarily want to, because a lot of those people who are toxic, they spend a lot of money on League of Legends. They buy a lot of skins. And so there's what holds this game back for me is the rudeness in the community, and Riot Games not really doing much about it, and how the creativity of Riot has kind of been hamstrung. And I think that they could do a whole lot more. So, the core gameplay itself is really, really solid. I think League of Legends has a better core to it than Heroes of the Storm, or which is Activision Blizzard's version of Dota. There's Dota 2 at Valve, which is probably a I don't want to say a close second. I think League of Legends is probably the best current MOBA out there. But I think this game can be so much more than it is right now. And that's kind of what holds it back for me. On top of the whole community thing, on top of the toxic corporate culture, or development culture of League of Legends, I think it could be so much more. It could be so much better than it is right now. And if it ever got to that potential, I would be open to doing an entire another episode about League of Legends. And it's so close to being a best game period, but it's just not there because, honestly, it's just not there because people suck. And other online games have figured out how to deal with people sucking, and Riot Games just can't or won't figure that out. So, anyway, that's my take on League of Legends. I think it deserves an honorable mention, but maybe not necessarily a best game period for me. I don't know how you all feel about it, though, so if you have different ideas or different thoughts or feelings, please share them respectfully over on Twitter at bestgamesperiod. That's where you can find us, and we always love hearing from you, so please drop us a message. And hey, retweet the show, or you've been on the internet before. Like, comment, subscribe, leave reviews, all the places. Leave an iTunes review. Leave a Twitter review, which that's just a Twitter message again. But yes, we appreciate all of your support and the people who continue listening to us and putting their faith in us as a small podcast. We appreciate it. And you can also support us for as little as $1 per month, and you'll get access to a lot of interesting little unique shows over on Patreon. We have a number of patron-only episodes of the podcast that haven't seen the light of day for non-patrons. And if you're interested in listening to those, head over to patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. And again, for as little as $1 a month, you get access to all of those shows. And we really appreciate it if you're throwing that stuff our way, because honestly, the show doesn't pay for itself. So we don't make money doing it. And hosting does cost money, unfortunately. So head over to patreon.com/bestgamesperiod and leave that there for us if you feel inclined. And finally, one of the amazing things out there in gaming right now is Extra Life. And if you haven't heard of Extra Life before, it's part of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, which helps sick and injured kids all across the United States and Canada. And you can learn more over at extra-life.org. And while you're over there, you can actually sign up. And when you sign up, you can choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital you want to support. And 100% of everything you raise goes directly to that hospital to help sick and injured kids. It's really, really wonderful. So please give it a shot. And, I left out the best part. You raise money by playing games. What? And this year, I believe, we have surpassed, or by the time you listen to this, we might have surpassed $12 million raised this year, which is already a record year for Extra Life. But you know what? Every bit helps. So please head over to extra-life.org to learn more. And you can find this very podcast on community.extra-life.org, the community side of things, where you can find articles written by me about gaming and the gaming community, and you can connect with the Extra Life community. So maybe find some people in your area who are passionate about Extra Life, and figure out how you can help if you are so inclined. So with that, I'm recording this. I'm trying to keep this episode as timeless as possible, so I'm trying not to reference any current events, just because I am recording this and I'm not sure when this episode will go live, because I just want to have it in my back pocket in case there's a week when neither Naomi nor I can record something. Actually, did I introduce myself? I don't think I did this week. Oh my goodness. Am I introducing myself at 49 minutes into this podcast? 48 minutes? Somewhere in there, depending on editing. I'm your host, Jack Gardner. Hi. And with that, I think that we'll be seeing you next time on the Flippity Dippity.